Okay, hello everyone. And before we start, let me direct your attention that I think from now on till the end of the semester, we will be having a meeting once every 2 weeks. And I think the phase stays once every 2 weeks to the end of the semester. But just follow the announcements. And we are happy to have Sébastien Martineau from Sorbonne University in Paris, and he will tell us about arithmetic percolation, colorings of ZD and things like this. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm very glad to be here today, and I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation. And indeed, what I want to talk about today is some arithmetic model in percolation theory, which is related to the so-called visible lattice points. And part of what I'm going to say is a joint work with Samuel Lefourne and Mike Liu. So to begin with, I want to explain what I mean by a visible lattice point. So I will explain it on Z2, it's the square lattice. So we put a light source, a lamp here in blue in the bottom left corner. And then a point of Z2 is put in red if it is visible from the origin. So the straight line between the lamp and the point touches no other point of the lattice. And other points are in the shade, in the shadow, they are put in black. So I just write it up. So in red, I put visible points. They will become white in other pages. It's just for this first page that I put them in red. And non-visible points are in black. Maybe to have some taste a bit of how this coloring looks like, well, it's nice to see it with our own eyes on a larger portion of the square lattice. So let me share this. Back. All right. So normally now you see another picture. So here it's the same, but seen from further away. Black is still black, red has turned white. And the lamp is now at the middle of the picture. And what we see is a very structured coloring, quite interesting actually. And this is essentially what we will try to understand today. Before showing a bit more simulation somehow, I would like to come back to this. Up. Okay, so where does arithmetic come from? Well, a point X is visible if and only if the GCD of its coordinates is equal to 1. Well, indeed, a point is not visible if it is a non-trivial multiple of some point, and the converse is true as well. So here is the connection with number theory. And related to the fact that the previous image looked very much symmetric, we indeed have a huge group of symmetries of this picture. This is a coloring of ZD that is left invariant under SLDZ or even GLDZ, but it's not a much larger group. Okay, so this comments being said, we can try and move on. And we have seen already what the coloring looks like. So what to do with it? Well, one thing we could do is study its white and black connected components. This has been done actually by Vardy in 1999, but it's not this angle of attack I want to have today. what I want to do is to let probability theory penetrate this topic. And in order to blend in some probability, we will look at this coloring from a point chosen uniformly at random in ZD. So, of course, said like this, it makes no sense. There is no uniform random variable in ZD, but we will make proper definitions and so on. But before getting to definitions, it's always nice to see pictures. So let's start with other pictures. So this is the picture we already saw at the beginning. Now we want to look at it from a point chosen uniformly at random in ZD. So in this simulation, what I did is I took a point uniformly at random in a 10 million per 10 million box centered at the origin. And we are looking at the landscape around this random point. And when we compare this random landscape to maybe the most usual random landscape, which is Bernoulli site percolation, we see something very different. So on the right-hand side, points are colored black or white independently with some fixed probability, which gives the same density as the picture on the left. On the left, we have some, I don't know, it's Manhattan. It's we have very straight and long avenues. On the right-hand side, it's the jungle, it's a forest. And if you put the three images together, well, on the top left, we have something deterministic, very much structured. On the right-hand side, on the top, we have something fully random and very disordered. And downstairs is the main protagonist of today's talk, which has at the same time some structure inside, but also some randomness. And we would like to understand this picture. Okay, and I go back to paper until the end of the talk. I will not switch back and forth forever. Okay. So the purpose of this talk is to define cleanly what we are talking about, in particular to take care of these quotation marks about uniformly at random in ZD, and then to count how many infinite black or white connected components there are in our random coloring. And the connected components will be called clusters using the classical terminology in percolation theory. But before getting to the main dish, some starter, as a warm-up, we can consider an easier question, which I will refer to as the one-point question. Just take 1 point uniformly at random in ZD, and we are wondering what is the probability it gets white, what is the probability it gets black. So instead of having this picture with a whole coloring, we just have 1 pixel picture. So I still need to make sense of uniformly at random in ZD. And to do so, I choose some exhaustion of ZD. So I take Fn, so not necessarily an exhaustion actually, but larger and larger sets. And Fn is one of these boxes. It can be the square box centered at the origin. It can be a square box, but with the origin in one corner. It can be the integer points in the Euclidean ball. It can be actually many other shapes. But today I do not want to strive for generality. I want to convey ideas in the simplest situations where they show themselves. So I will remain concrete all along. But if you are interested in like sharper results or assumption, you can have a look at my paper. Okay, so now we can state the 1-point theorem. So I call it 1-point theorem only in the context of this talk. It's not the canonical name at all. It's a theorem due to Dirichlet, like almost 2 centuries ago. And it's stated as follows: let xn be a point chosen uniformly at random in Fn. Then the probability that xn is visible converges when n goes to infinity to 1 over zeta d. And zeta denotes the usual Euler-Riemann zeta function. Here it's more due to Euler than to Riemann because we don't need a meromorphic extension at all. So for any s real number larger than or equal to 1, we have a zeta s given by this usual formula. And I will not prove this theorem, but I want to take 1 minute to give some heuristic explanation about this 1 over zeta d. Assume that the proportion P of the set of visible points is well defined. I denote the set of visible points by V. Then ZD can be partitioned as follows. We have singleton the origin, V, then twice V, 3 times V, etc. Just partitioning according to the GCD. And now the proportion of ZD inside itself is equal to 1. Singleton, it's proportion 0. Here we have P by definition. Here we dilate by 2 in all of the D directions. So it gets sparser with this factor. Etc. So this is a 3 minus 3 to the minus d. Okay, and what we get is 1 equal to p times zeta d, which is exactly what we wanted. Okay, so this is a nice heuristic explanation. It's not a rigorous proof, however, because of the following difficulties. First, the proportion is not obviously well defined. It is not so clear that this limit indeed exists. And sigma additivity does not hold in general. Indeed, ZD can be written as the union of its singletons, and 1 is not equal to a sum of zeros. Okay. Well, this being said, the warm-up is over, so we can try to state the whole coloring theorem now. And to do so, we need some framework. Yeah, I forgot the end of the title. So we introduce the space of colorings, omega, the set of maps from ZD to black and white. We endow it with the product topology, product of discrete topologies, which makes of omega a nice metrizable compact space, actually homeomorphic to the contour set. And inside the space of colorings, one particular coloring that we are very much interested in, I call it V for visibility. It's mapping X to white if the GCD of X1, XD is equal to 1 and black otherwise. And we will want to move this coloring around in order to look at it from a uniform point. So we need some shifting operator. So for Y in ZD, I denote by tau YV the shift of the coloring V by the vector Y. So if you like formulas, we can define it in this way. So tau YV maps X to V of some guy. The guy should be X minus Y, maybe X plus Y. The sign is maybe not so clear. Actually, the correct sign is minus, And one way to understand well why it should be so is that when we translate our picture by y, well, what happens at y should be what was before at 0. So the equality I'm pointing at should be correct. And with the minus sign, it's indeed correct. V of y minus y is v of 0, but if I was putting a plus, it would be v of 2y, which is not what we want. And okay, so now we are good. We are able to state the theorem. So let xn be a point chosen uniformly at random in Fn. Then tau minus xn v converges in distribution to some explicit probability measure on omega. There is this minus sign here because, well, we want to look at stuff from the point of view of xn. So we want to move back xn to the origin. So we need to shift the picture by minus xn. So this is the probabilistic way of stating the theorem. For people who would be more inclined into combinatorics, maybe the second statement, which is equivalent, would be nicer. So equivalently, what it means is that there is some explicit probability measure mu on omega, such that for every finite size event A, the probability that tau minus xn v satisfies it converges when n goes to infinity to the probability of A for the measure mu. And what I mean by finite size event is a subset A of omega, such that in order to check whether it holds or not, it suffices to look at the picture within some fixed finite box. So now I will explain to you what is this measure mu. But apart from this, is the theorem clear, or are there some questions? I will move on, but if I get interrupted, or if you tell me that there is a question in the chat or whatever, I will be glad to answer. So what is mu? Well, one good reason not to be visible is if your GCD is a multiple of 2. And if this guy, for example, is a multiple of 2, then all the guys that agree modulo 2 should as well be black. And we get a coloring like this, where some places have turned black, and some have not turned black yet, but will become black sooner. But having an even GCD is not the only way to have a GCD that is not equal to 1. You can have a GCD that is a multiple of 3. So maybe here, this guy is a multiple of 3. And then people who agree modulo 3 should get black. This one here was already black, so it just stays black. Then we need to do the same for the number 4, but 4 is already taken care of by 2. Then 5. Okay, 5, I've done it by adding this guy on the people who agree modulo 5. 6 is taken care of by its prime divisors. Then 7, maybe 7 comes here. Then 11, maybe 13. Maybe then 17 and higher primes don't hit this box, maybe. And this is in this way that we will define mu, actually. So this was not very precise in any way. So here is a proper definition. So for every prime, we pick a uniform element WP in Z mod P to the D. And we color some vertex of ZD black if and only if one prime selects its coordinate modulo P. So there is some P such that the projection modulo P of X is equal to WP. Another way to phrase it is that if we think of WP as a subset of ZD, well, black is just the union over all primes of the WPs. And I define mu to be the distribution of this random coloring. I hope this definition is clear. If it's not, please feel free to interrupt. I should explain it again. And now what I want to do is not to prove this theorem in detail, but to give you a good idea of what are the...
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
When you pick the uniform elements, WP, does W are independent if P is different? Like,
Yeah, very good question. Indeed, I left some space above to add the word independently, but I totally forgot. So thanks for asking. So indeed, we do it independently. And this independence will get less mysterious in 5 minutes and will be related to the Chinese remainder theorem. Thank you very much for asking. Otherwise, the distribution was not clear. Any other questions? If not, I will state and prove one lemma that plays a role in the proof. So we take xn as usual. And actually, since there is some n coming, I will call it xk. We take n at least 1, pi n reduction modulo n. Then pi n of xk converges in distribution when k goes to infinity to the uniform random variable on the discrete torus z mod n to the d. And I would like to sketch you the proof of this lemma. So we take fk, k much larger than n, and these little squares you see, they have side length n. And we are tiling fk by n by n squares. Tiling meaning that we put as many squares as we can, like in this manner. And well, if some squares are outside fk or partly inside, partly outside, then we don't draw them. But then it's not a perfect tiling. There is some boundary in red like this. And now what we can observe is that for any y in z mod n to z, the probability that pi n xk is equal to some fixed y, given that xk is not red, this is exactly 1 over n to the d. Because in order to take a uniform random variable in the non-red zone of fk, I can just pick uniformly at random some congruence modulo n. I pick uniformly at random some square here, and I just select the dot in this square corresponding to this congruence. So if I condition on not being in the red part, I have exactly uniform distribution, and the probability that xk is red tends to 0, so we are done. And a natural property that makes this lemma work, which holds for many other fk's than the what I've mentioned before, is the notion of Fellner sequence. I recall that Fk is a Fellner sequence means that the boundary of Fk has a size that is negligible compared with the size of the set itself. So it's an isoperimetric condition. And the boundary of Fk means just take Zd to be endowed with its usual graph structure. It's the set of edges that have 1 foot inside, 1 foot outside of Fk. And it turns out that this property does not depend on the Kelly graph structure. It's an intrinsic property that can be stated with the group only. We don't need graph theory, but it's easier to visualize this way. Okay, good. So we have this lemma. Now, by the Chinese remainder theorem, Z mod n to the D is isomorphic to the product of Z mod pi to the alpha I to the D, where I have factorized n by writing it p1 to the alpha 1 up to pk to the alpha k. So here we have some uniform probability measure on Z mod n to the D. Z mod n to the D is isomorphic to this product. Now, a last important observation is that the uniform probability measure on a product space, product of finite space, is the product of uniform probability measures. And this is where the independent uniform P layers come from. Here we have the P's. Uniformity comes from what I've just said, and independence from what is written just above as well. So we could think that we are nearly done. Maybe everything follows nicely and there is no more ID to have, it's settled. It's a bit more subtle, though. There is a problem. So these observations do not suffice to conclude because of some lack of continuity somehow. And I can explain what I mean by lack of continuity with the following example. So consider this sequence, factorial k plus 1, comma 0. This converges profinitely to 1, 0. Profinite convergence is not a complicated, it's a complicated word, but it's not a complicated concept. It just means that for any n, if I take k large enough, depending on n, then factorial k plus 1, comma 0 agrees with 1, 0 modulo n. So we have this convergence. However, the visibility condition is not coherent with these limits. What I mean is that factorial k plus 1, 0, it has GCD equal to factorial k plus 1, which is not 1. And in the limit, the GCD is equal to 1. In other words, the set of coprimes is not profinitely open. It's not open for the profinite topology. Okay, so too bad. We have a problem here. Okay. However, we have one problem, but we also have one solution, because it is a nice exercise to check that the set of coprimes is profinitely closed. It's not open, but it's closed. In other words, black vertices can turn white in the limit, but the opposite is impossible. I mean, indeed, if I take for this topology, this point was supposed to be, it was black, and in the limit, it changes color. Well, one can use this semi-continuity to prove the following proposition. Let Xn be as usual, so a uniform point in Fn. Let Nk be such that the subsequence tau minus Xnkv converges in distribution to some probability measure we denote by rho. Then rho is stochastically dominated by mu. And what I recall what stochastic domination means in this context, it means that there are omega valued random variables, called rho and called mu, defined on the same probability space, such that the following three conditions hold. The rho coloring is rho distributed, the mu coloring is mu distributed, and almost surely, or even surely, the rho coloring is a subset of the mu coloring. What I mean by this is that the white elements of the rho coloring form a subset of the white elements of the mu coloring. So yeah, once again, things can go wrong in one direction, but not in the other. Well, this transfers into a proposition saying that any sublimit in distribution must satisfy some inequality, not necessarily an equality, but at least this inequality with the measure mu we have explicitly defined sooner. And I do not want to prove this proposition, but and I've given ideas why it should be true. But I will rather want to prove the whole coloring theorem using this proposition. So recall that omega is compact. So the space of probability measures on omega is itself compact. So it suffices to prove that all sublimits are equal to mu. So let nk be such that tau minus xnk converges to something, which I call rho. It suffices to show that rho is equal to mu. By the proposition, rho is stochastically dominated by mu. And now we will conclude by an argument which I find cute. We will just prove that the two probability measures here and there have the same density. And then if we have some inclusion on the same density, in much the same way as two finite sets which have one inclusion on equal cardinalities have to be equal, well, in the same way, rho and mu will have to be the same measure. So we have this inequality. We need to prove that both have the same size, the same quantity of white inside them, or quantity of black, it's the same. I mean, it's one minus the other. So by using the 1-point theorem, we know what is the probability for rho that the origin is visible. It actually even works for any x. And it is equal to 1 over zeta d. On the other hand, the probability for mu that x is visible is, well, in order for it to be visible, it needs to be visible for every p simultaneously. The p layers are independent, so we take a product. And the probability to be hidden in the p layer is 1 over p to the d. We need to select the bad congruence. So the probability not to be hidden is 1 minus 1 over p to the d. And this is equal to 1 over zeta d by Eulerian product formula Therefore, for any x, the probability that x is visible is the same for rho and for mu. In both cases, we get 1 over zeta d. So I call this condition 1, this condition 2, and by 1 plus 2, we are done. Are there questions about this proof? So I would like to comment that what was crucial here, well, it was important to have this proposition, of course, to have the inequality, and it was important to have the one-point theorem. And this hints at the natural conditions to ask for the sequence fk. So if you want more general shapes, well, it should be a Fellner sequence. I mean, it should be. I just mean that what follows is a natural sufficient condition, which is quite general. So Fn should be a Fellner sequence. In this way, the previous lemma works, and therefore the proposition works as well. But we also need the one-point theorem. So it should be a Fellner sequence such that the one-point theorem holds. And I don't want to state the optimal, or I don't want to state a sharp one-point theorem, but there are statements with, yeah, kind of minimalistic assumptions somehow. I don't know if they are exactly optimal or, but very natural and wide assumptions. So yeah, Fn should be a Fellner sequence satisfying some condition I don't spell out. And this gives something more general than just the list of the list I gave at the beginning with a square on balls. Good. So now that I have explained this theorem, I would like to say a few words, sorry, about yeah, some bibliographical comments. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to handle the Zoom stuff. Okay, good. So some bibliographical comments, because I've not said anything about this theorem, the whole coloring, how should it be attributed or anything. So the one-point theorem, there are many articles and books where this theorem appears with different proofs. So here is just one selection of some articles, books that mention it. The original paper by Dirichlet, the introduction to number theory by Hardy and Wright, and some paper by Garey with a probabilistic proof. And well, the whole coloring version can be found in my archive paper I mentioned earlier, with title on coprime percolation, etc. But the bibliographical comments do not stop here, because actually when I had my proof and started to write it, I discovered that the theorem I've just explained you was already proved in a paper by Pleasance and Huck. But I was still thinking that it's okay because I am using different techniques. So I was using profinite methods. They were thinking, okay, still nice to make a paper out of it because here Pleasance and Huck, what they do is they extend classical techniques, but I'm using a different technique, so it's still nice. And just a few weeks ago, I discovered that profinite methods have already been used in the 1 point in order to prove the 1 point result as well. So it's paper by Kubota Sugita. 2002. So yeah, when I started doing it, the situation was this one to the best of my knowledge, and actually the situation is this one. So why not? Let's say that it means that this investigation is natural to make. So let's say it's something positive. And I would like to mention, however, certain number of aspects that are new in this paper, or at least that are new to the best of my current knowledge. Let's take some precautions. So first, I'm dealing with general FNs. I focused in my exposition on some particular coloring, but it really works for very general colorings. For primes, square free guys in Z, K-free tuples in ZD, actually any profinitely closed condition. It actually even works for the whole GCD coloring. So instead of having two colors, you color with a natural number that is the GCD. So it seems that if you can do the GCD with any coloring, it's true for certain statements, but for some finer statements, the results cannot be deduced from one another. I don't get into these details. I can also deal with more general limits. So there is this limit process we have seen today, which is some form of Benjamin-Ishram limit, we could say. I can also get a Graffon limit, which concretely means the following. If you take 10 points uniformly at random in ZD, you can ask the question, which ones can see which ones? Well, there is one Graffon that answers, that gives the joint probability measure for the answers of all of these questions simultaneously. And 10 was obviously arbitrary when I was saying 10 points. And we can even have a mixed Benjamin-Ishram Graffon limit. So we take 10 points uniformly at random in ZD. For each of them, we look at the 10 neighborhood. In this way, we select a certain number of points, and we can answer the question, who sees who? Yeah, I'm really not good with this Zoom thing. Okay, and one sec. Okay. I can also sample in affine subspaces instead of taking a uniform point in ZD. I can take it in ZD -1. I don't know. And the statement is made in a way that makes it natural to look at mu of any event. What I mean is not finite size events. If we look at mu of finite size events, well, we are just looking at properties occurring inside the original coloring. It's some asymptotic of a pattern, asymptotic density. But what is really nice is, yeah, that this probability measure, then it makes sense for any events. And then the connection with the original model is more subtle. But then also it's richer to be able to ask new questions that were not easy to ask beforehand. So this is what I will spend some time on in the last part of my talk. We will study infinite clusters for the random coloring distributed according to mu. So the existence of an infinite cluster is not a finite size event, obviously. We're looking at infinite clusters wherever we want in our graph. And to understand what can go wrong when we take limits, here is an example I like. On the left-hand side, we have some deterministic coloring. Everything is white, except for some squares like this, centered at the origin, and with radius 2 to the k for all k's. And when we reroute this coloring along Fn, this converges to the Dirac mass on the all-white coloring. And on the left-hand side, we have no infinite white cluster because of this black stuff. And on the right, we have one infinite white cluster. Everything is white. And if I modify a bit my coloring upstairs by adding one half line like this, then the convergence is the same. We still have no infinite white cluster, and we have one infinite black cluster. And on the right-hand side, we have no black at all. So in particular, no infinite black cluster. So taking limits can change very much the behavior of infinite clusters. So this is something to have in mind when we perform such a study. And now the theorem, second theorem I want to discuss today, so second and last theorem, is that for any d larger than or equal to 2, if ZD is endowed with its usual graph structure, then there is almost surely exactly one infinite white cluster and no infinite black cluster. So one infinite white cluster, no infinite black cluster. And one remark I want to make for people who know percolation theory is that the Burton-King argument does not apply here because this model is not insertion tolerant at all. So to prove this theorem, it's possible to derive it directly from the study of Vardy and the theorem of well, either Pleasance and Huck or my paper. But proof that I find much clearer is given by some work in progress with Samuel Le Fourne and Mike Liu. So here, work in progress means that we have the proof, we have a first draft, but we need improving the writing and so on. And I want to explain you this proof. So we will prove the result in dimension 2. And I claim that in order to prove the result in dimension 2, it suffices to show that this event has a probability converging to 1 fast enough. So the event we are considering is we take a domino of height 3 to the n, of width 3 to the n plus 1, and we ask for the existence of a white horizontal line within the domino. And converging fast enough here means that the probability of the complements should be summable. So why does it suffice? Well, because of the Borel-Cantelli lemma on some drawings. Indeed, by the Borel-Cantelli lemma, I will know that all the following events occur up to finitely many of them. And then I can get white lines like this And if I have such white lines, which I draw in red, then I can have no infinite black cluster, because if I try to make my way to infinity, I will be blocked by some red square. And I have at most one infinite white cluster. For a similar reason, if I make two attempts to have infinite white clusters, they get connected by some square like this. So we have the non-existence of black cluster, the uniqueness of white cluster, but why does it exist? Well, because of the following picture. We are making a staircase, and this yields some infinite path. Okay, so indeed, it does suffice to prove that these events have probability going to 1 fast enough. So, 1 second. How to control these probabilities? Well, we will proceed differently when we want to take care of some P layer. We do it differently depending on whether P is large or small. I will declare that a prime number P is large if it is larger than 10 to the n and small otherwise. And for our event to occur, it suffices to have the conjunction of the following two events. The first one is that for every large P, the P layer places not a single dot inside the rectangle we are looking at. So then we know that large P's do not interfere at all with what we want to see inside the box, because we want to see something white. So not having black is only helping for sure. And the second condition is that if we use only small P's to draw our picture and we forget about the large ones, then we can find an infinite horizontal white line such that its height makes it cross the rectangle. So when we have 1 and 2, we have this picture. Maybe, so actually it will be the case that large P's will sometime block this line outside the rectangle. But in all cases, if we have 1 and 2, we indeed have the event which is drawn on the first line of this slide, on this page. So the probability of this event is larger than the probability that both events occur. And since the P layers are independent, it's the product of the intersection is the product of probabilities. The probability of 1 is easy to estimate. The probability of 1 is, well, the P layers are independent, so it's the product for primes starting at 10, for primes larger than P to the 10 to the n, sorry. Well, it's the product of 1 minus the area of the rectangle divided by P squared. The area of the rectangle is given by this formula. We can lower bound this by the product over all k's, not necessarily prime, of the same formula, still starting at 10 to the n. And then it's easy to estimate this quantity. And indeed, it converges exponentially fast to 1. Now we need to control the probability of the event number 2. To do so, for every y between 0 and 3 to the n, we introduce the following random variables. So we work in the small p regime. So in what comes next, we use only small p's to define the coloring. And x and y, it's the indicator that the line of height y makes the event 2 work. We have an infinite white line at height y. And nn is the number of such lines, so it's the sum over all admissible y's of x and y. By classical second moment method, by Chebyshev's inequality, it suffices to prove that the variance divided by the square of the expectation goes to 0 fast enough. And this reduces to estimating the expectation of x and y and the covariances of x and y, x and z, which can be done by arithmetic methods. And this is the sketch of the proof. And I just want to mention that in order to have nice estimates about the expectation, we use Mertens' third theorem, stating that this product is equivalent to exponential minus gamma over log n, where gamma is the Euler-Mascheroni constant, the one in the asymptotics of the harmonic series. What about higher dimensions? Well, quite amusingly, it is a corollary of the two-dimensional case. Indeed, it is an exercise to check that if we take the d-dimensional model and we project its shadow in dimension 2, it gives the two-dimensional model. So by projecting the shadow, I mean that we consider this map, x gives x1, x2, and we declare some guy in Z2 black, if and only if in its pre-image there is at least one black vertex. So, and once we have this, it's easy to conclude, because if we have such a picture, well, in V3, we should see these squares as towers with fully white walls. And if you want to build a box, it's sufficient to intersect a vertical tower with a horizontal tower. So you project in Z2 in two different directions, and you get what you want in V3. I will be over very soon. Just 2 minutes to tell you what I like about this model. So what I like is the interplay between arithmetic and probability in percolation theory. I don't believe that this will help solve big classical questions in number theory, but I do hope that maybe it could lead to nice questions from the point of view of number theory. So not solving old questions, but giving nice, interesting questions. As for the percolation aspects, it gives a nice example of percolation process with funny properties, which is interesting in its own sake and also interesting for theory building. If we want to have a nice theory, it's good to have nice examples to test it against. And very quickly, here are a few things to say. So Bernoulli percolation and the random coprime coloring are both ergodic, but for very different reasons. In Bernoulli percolation, we have the mixing property. In random coprime coloring, it's not the case at all. Actually, if you know the coloring in restriction to half space or even n to the d, then it gives it on ZD. So knowing what happens in one half space prescribes what happens in the other. Also, Bernoulli percolation has finite energy. meaning insertion and deletion tolerance, which is not the case at all in random coprime coloring. However, to some extent, the random coprime coloring has nice properties. To some other extent, here it's less nice, but for example, quotients are easy to handle. On the left-hand side, it's more subtle. We need to take exploration process and so on to define couplings. And finally, for Bernoulli percolation, when you want to look at crossing events, you have to allow for a complicated path, or otherwise you are sure that your event will have a very small probability. Here, it's possible to hope for straight lines, which is funny and which makes it that we don't need to rely on discrete version of the Jordan curve theorem, or it's a funny thing that is quite different from the Bernoulli version. And very last slide. I also believe that this fits in nicely in the structure versus randomness paradigm. So on Terence Tao's blog, there are 3 Simons lectures, and I'm referring to the second of them. And in dynamical systems, we can speak of some random systems, some structured systems. Here, I'm speaking of the Bernoulli shift. The Bernoulli shift with P sub P is a product of Bernoulli P measures. So this is an example of a random system. It's mixing. On the right-hand side, we take an aperiodic rotation on the circle, and this is an example of a structured system. It is almost periodic. Well, the example I've been discussing today is an example in percolation theory where we have this almost periodic flavor. Actually, when we let Z act on the circle by aperiodic rotation, it's one way to realize Z as a countable dense subgroup in the compact group R mod Z. Well, here what we are doing is very much similar. Z to the D is a, I don't know if I said discrete dense, what I meant was countable dense. So ZD is a countable dense subgroup in its profinite completion, which is a compact group. And ZD acts on this with Haar measure. And it turns out that the percolation process we've been discussing is a factor of this dynamical system. Okay, I'm over time, so I stop here, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Sebastian. Any questions?
So I have one. You said something about the decay of correlations, but was it for? It was a bit blurry, so I couldn't see the page. So if you know that the point is black and you take a point far away from it, what can you say about the correlation between them?
Okay, so the fact is that if you take, very good question. If you take what happens at the origin, for example, and what happens at, let's say, N0, well, if, for example, if N is even, then they will be very much correlated, because as soon as P equal to turns the origin black, then 2N0 will be black automatically. So we have the correlations bounded below, like so. But what happens is that if you take N0 and N turns out to have no small prime divisor, then they will kind of decorrelate, I guess. But just assuming that N is large in the usual sense, yeah, it's not sufficient.
But I mean, if you take a uniform point on a large enough box, can't you say that with high enough probability it has a certain prime, good prime divisibility?
I don't know if I understood the question correctly.
I mean, there's always a probability that you fall on these black infinite lines, right? And then there's no correlation decay. But is there some structural thing that you can say that with probability going to 1 or bounded away from 0 at least, right? So it will never be at least bounded away from 0. You can bound rate of correlation decays.
Yeah, I'm not sure I will be able to say. Yeah, maybe my mind is not in the correct alignment to answer your question. But one thing I can say, however, and I can say it once again, is that if with probability 1, if I give you the coloring in the upper half space, then you can, with probability 1, guess all the colors in the complement. So this kind of breaks many attempts to have some decorations. But maybe this was not your question, but let's say it's my answer. I don't know. we can discuss it once again.
Sure.
Hi, excuse me, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, I noticed that you can choose like a large class of a domain in the beginning, and after you've chosen the domain, you uniformly chosen one point, and then you explore the neighbor of that point. So it occurred to me that is uniformly choosing that point that really necessary for your model. Is that possible that maybe for a large class of measure, maybe not uniform measure, on the box, you can also have this limit?
Yeah, exactly. So indeed, you can do what you say. Like what matters is just that the framework you work in makes the lemma work, and once you have this, it's okay. So the lemma is that modulo n stuff should get equidistributed. But if you have this for another reason than being uniform, then it's all fine. So indeed, for example, we could take our point to be I don't know, some xn yn, where xn and yn are independent geometric with parameter going to 1 or 0 depending on your conventions, or it could be xn and yn independent zeta with parameter going to 1, or yeah, any kind of measures that makes the lemma of equidistribution modulo n work, then it will be okay. And I would also like to mention that from the Follner sequence statement, so first, it's possible to prove the lemma without going through Follner sequences, just as I mentioned, in the direction you were suggesting. And also, if we assume the lemma for Follner sequences, we can already deduce it for other measures. Like if you have a measure, I mean, I will not be able to explain properly, but here I'm trying to represent mass. I'm representing the density here of some measure. Well, if this set I represent as a segment is, so here it's ZD and here it's the density. If this set is Follner, the second one is Follner as well. If you assume this, then from the by linear combinations of the Follner sequence lemma, you can deduce it for several measures, and then taking appropriate limits, etc. So, yeah, Okay, I will not make this answer longer, but indeed, it's possible to generalize in this direction in a straightforward way.
Sebastian, thank you very much for the very nice and clear talk. I have a question. In some sense, in your percolation, white is much stronger than black. You can percolate with straight lines, and seems like there's overall more white than black. Is there any way to introduce maybe a continuous parameter to give black a better chance? You can, for instance, sprinkle with a Bernoulli percolation, add some probability P for black, but maybe you want to keep your structure a bit more. I don't know. Maybe you had the 1 point theorem said that the density was zeta to the D. Maybe you can cook up a model where the density is zeta to some general parameter alpha and 2 alpha, even in 2 dimensions, but 2 alpha, I don't know, to get something critical. Is there something interesting? Or even just the sprinkling with Bernoulli percolation could make the proofs much harder, maybe.
Yes, so there are things that can be done in such a direction. If you want to stay in a very rigid regime, so with no Bernoulli anywhere,
Yes.
What we can do is probably take k independent copies, and if we are black in one copy, then we are black.
Yes, that's good, but it's somehow doesn't have a continuous parameter, but it's also good.
Sure, and so I have a model with one parameter, which is a work in progress, but here it means that I have the theorems, but I have not started to write. Yeah, what you can do is, instead of studying visibility in ZD, instead of taking ZD, you take a Bernoulli site percolation of parameter P on ZD. And then you study a limit in this forest with random trees. So you do not keep all the points, you just keep some of them. And you remember, you ask the question, what is visible from the origin, but the trees are placed in a different fashion. And the good stuff to look at is, so imagine you have trees at random like this. You have a hunter at the origin, and you've got a rabbit that wants to be visible. Well, a rabbit will be seen. The rabbit will be seen if it is, I don't know, I will put it in red. If the rabbit is here, it will be seen here as well. If it is inside the bush, it is not seen. And if it is aligned behind the bush, it's not seeable as well. And if you do this, you can prove that taking Benjamin-Ishram limits gives the following stuff. What you do is, on ZD, you take the limit of the GCD coloring. Maybe this guy has GCD2, this one has GCD3, this one has GCD maybe 2, this one 4. And then the limit model is, you take this random scenery, which is almost periodic, very arithmetic. And then in this random scenery, what you do is some Bernoulli percolation, but with independent, so conditionally on the scenery, it is independent Bernoulli percolation, but with parameter depending on the GCD of where you are. And you open each guy with probability P to the GCD of X.
That's very nice. I see.
And so indeed, I came up with this model exactly for the reasons you want. Like, we want to make phase transitions. If we want to make phase transitions, we want to have a parameter that moves continuously.
Yeah.
So we can do this. And most of the basic questions are not hard to answer. But yes, then, yeah, if you want to study sharpness or stuff like that, this is the kind of questions I don't know how to do yet. Maybe they are hard, maybe there is some tricks that makes them easy. But yeah, so in a nutshell, it is possible to introduce a one parameter model. However, this model is less almost periodic than the previous one. It's a bit more Bernoulli looking.
Yes, very nice. Thank you very much.
Sure.
There's a raised hand by Omer.
Yes, I have. What if you have two light sources, and you want a visible point will have to be visible from both points. So you'll have more black points, and
so if you have two light sources, you have more white points, right?
No, you have more black ones. You want
to be visible.
A visible point will have to be visible from both points.
Okay, so then if what you do is you take, okay, I will restate one thing. What I said is that we put the light source at the origin and we are located somewhere at random, but equivalently, I could say that we are around the origin and the light source is somewhere chosen at random. It's the same. So in your case, if both light sources are placed uniformly at random independently, then it will really be the same as take two independent copies of this process. And,
yes, for the one point, it's the same. But what about the clusters?
This I don't know. This I don't know. And yeah, that's probably a nice stuff to look at because for example, this process is ergodic. So the number of white connected clusters, white infinite clusters is as a deterministic value, the same for black. But since we don't have Burton-Keane or insertion tolerance, we cannot say that almost surely, I mean, it could be that almost surely we have infinitely many black infinite clusters, or that almost surely we have 10 of them, or I don't know, maybe I'm missing a trivial argument, but so no, okay, so the answer is I don't know how to answer your question. And I believe that in order to answer it, we need other ideas than what I have told today, because the only thing we were able to say about black was no black because of surrounding properties of white. But then, yeah, I mean, so yeah, I have really not said anything that can help prove the existence of black clusters. So yeah, I guess it should be a nice question, and I don't know how to solve it so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also we can ask a question: if we take ZD with another Kelly graph structure, then our proof breaks apart because we really use I mean, we can ask to have one horizontal line like this, but we cannot ask to have two horizontal lines exactly one above the other, because congruence modulo 2 will automatically kill one of the two. So if we take a generating system that makes jumps of 1 and jumps of 2, then we cannot adapt this uniqueness argument, because this uniqueness argument cannot be adapted to to even 2 lines. It just works for one single line. So another way also, one way to change the percolative properties is to change the density of white and black, but another way is to keep the coloring and to change the calligraph structure on ZD. And this, so far, I don't know how to know, but I would like to have a look at it sometime.
Thank you.
Maybe another option, which is between Omar's suggestion and Ron's suggestion, is to have like a Poisson process of light sources, but shine only to a finite distance. And then you have a continuous parameter, which is the distance, and the continuous parameter, which is the density of the light sources. And then you have both of classical percolation coming into play and the number theory in the nearby light sources.
This has a
But maybe it's
this
too
is a
crazy.
nice yeah, okay, yeah, it
Nice.
seems good.
But then you can definitely kind of fit parameters such that you get
Yeah,
phase
yeah,
transition.
because yeah. Huh. Yeah, I guess that in one of the limits, when density goes to 0 and the strength of light rays is strong enough, we probably get the present model with a Poissonian
Exactly.
number of independent copies superposed.
Uh-huh.
But then we have all other regimes that could interpolate, and yeah, this has a yeah. Okay, I like the idea. Thanks.
Sure. Enjoy.
Okay, I think people have basically left, but thank you again, Seb, and maybe I will ask one question, but I will release everyone first because my question
Sure.
will be probability. So everybody is free to go.